Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, and welcome to our Aerospace Nation series. We are very pleased that Dr. Victoria Coleman, the new Chief Scientist of the U.S. Air Force, could join us today. As a scientific advisor to the Air Force Chief of Staff and the Secretary of the Air Force, Dr. Coleman's responsible for identifying and analyzing the technical challenges facing the Air Force today. Dr. Coleman draws on more than 35 years of experience in computer science and technology, including both as an academic leader and industry executive. She previously served in a series of executive positions in the technology industry and as a director of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So welcome, Dr. Coleman, and thank you very much for making time to join us today, and congratulations again on your recent appointment.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, what I'd like to do is start off by giving you an opportunity to make a few remarks on the critical challenges that your team is facing and some of your top priorities as you look into the future. So over to you.
Okay. That might turn out to be a strategic error on your part, but I'm happy to share with you the context and the background that I have been living in for many years now, and what I'm hoping to bring to the position here. So as you know, I spent most of my career outside of government. In fact, my DARPA position was the very first government job I ever had, which is perhaps a slightly odd introduction to government service, although prior to that I had served on the Defense Science Board. So I spent most of my career in the private sector. I also had the privilege of, kind of falling into computer science early on. So I've also, over my career seen the trials and tribulations of our discipline and how it has changed to be what it is today. So, hopefully I'm at the crosshairs of these two kind of forces, and I hope to bring some of that kind of background in the way of thinking to the Air Force. And to be frank, I think that's why I was hired. I wasn't hired on the basis of my extensive government service, because my government service was rather short for coming to the Air Force. I am thrilled to be here. In my career, I started off, as you pointed out, as an academic, doing lots of things in the lab and having a lot of fun, but then also being frustrated because the things we were doing in the lab would never find the light of day. Nobody would use them, and why wouldn't people use them? So all my career, I've been trying to get closer and closer and closer to where people actually could use the technologies to do something, something different. So in many ways, it's a natural progression coming here after serving at DARPA, because now I have the privilege of serving inside of a service that is a user, and perhaps a primary user of the innovations that DARPA kind of brings around. So what matters, what I think about? I think a lot about the context within which the Air Force pursues its mission. And I think about the technology environment within which it pursues its mission. And that has changed a great deal, needless to say. And it's changed in kind of subtle ways. I mean, it used to be the case that most of the innovation that we depended on actually came from the defense industrial base. That stopped being the case some time ago. But then, when you think about it, what do we depend on today? Well, it used to be that, we depended on things like the cloud and, PCs and software operating systems of various kinds. They came from, what I would call the large established IT companies, the Microsofts of the world, the Hewlett-Packards of the world. But if you think about now, what defines, the kind of technology landscape within which the Air Force has to operate today, it's a little different. It's a phone maker. It's an advertising company, heaven forbid. It's a retailer. It's a company that keeps your address book. these are the companies that are defining the technology landscape within which the Air Force has to prosecute its mission. So the interesting thing about that is that these are all consumer technologies. So what you're having now is an ascendancy, in fact, of consumer technology, and that affects everything else that we do. So I think it's a well-known fact. We have trouble, connecting the needs that we have in the department and satisfying them with technology that comes from the private sector. It's twice as hard if it's the consumer space that these technologies are evolved in that we would need to absorb in the department. And it's triply hard because our competition doesn't have that problem. So as you well know, in China, they have this, they call it MCF, military civil fusion, that President Xi Jinping is personally in charge of. And the stated objective is to make sure that every single innovation that happens in the private sector is harnessed to support China's drive to become the premier military power in the world. So for them, it's built in. For us, I think in the department, it's fair to say that it's a struggle. So I come to this position, very mindful of the need to bridge that gap. And many of the things that you'll hear me talk about, and I did talk about when I was at DARPA, are informed by that almost paranoia, I think, that I have with our ability to absorb some of that technology back into our mission. The other thing that I just want to put on your radar is something that actually my good friend Christine Fox talks about all the time at APL. We don't have a deficit of innovation in the department. We have a ton of it. What we struggle with is translating that innovation into fieldable technology. And there's a whole host of reasons, as you know, why that is the case. I will say that, my motto is that innovation is not something that belongs, in our case, to the AFRL, our brilliant researchers in the AFRL. Innovation needs to be executable by the entire organization, all the way, from my boss, Chief Brown, all the way to the kind of lowest leaf in hierarchy in the Air Force. And so it's something that we need to be thoughtful about, and it's something that we need to be deliberate about, understanding, implementing, and making it a reality. So that kind of drives, I think, a whole bunch of stuff. I will say also one last thing, and that I'm very proud of. In every position I've had before, including my position at DARPA, I always harped on and on about the need to have an S&T strategy. And you know what? In the Air Force, we have one. And not only we have one, but I will brag that it's perhaps the most well-structured strategy that I've seen in a long while. And we all look back to the to the Harold Brown years and the magic that was perpetrated back then, inside this amazing building. I think the S&T strategy that the department put forward in 2018, taking us out to 2030, is actually I think it's an exemplar of what the strategy ought to be, because the team that put it together resisted the temptation to produce a list of technologies. The first thing that comes to mind is somebody says, "What's your S&T strategy?" "Oh, it's quantum. What is this? Or is that?" It's like, no, stop. What is it for? My boss, Chief Brown, says readiness. Ready for what? So I think here it's the same, strategy, for what? So we are fortunate in having a strategy that actually, focused on what we want the Air Force to be, how we want the Air Force to distinguish itself, as it competes, as it prosecutes its mission, and then From that, we figured out there were some capabilities that we needed to have available. And from that, our brilliant researchers in the FRL and other places would go off and build out these capabilities. So I think we are blessed with an S&T strategy that can be truly material as we align our resources and our efforts in order to make innovation happen and have it matter actually for the Air Force by taking it all the way to the end. So with that, I'll stop. Maybe some questions that either you or people in the audience have, just to give you an opportunity perhaps to react to some of the things that I've said.
Well, first, thanks very much for that context and insight. And thanks for everything you and your team is doing. I really appreciated and valued your comments on strategy being not just a list of things, but the tie between ultimately what you want to accomplish in the context of desired outcomes or desired effects. And yeah, technologies are a means to get there. Anyway, congratulations with that. Now let's jump in a little deeper on that and a couple other topics that you raised. You did previously co-chair the review panel for the Air Force's S&T strategy that we were just chatting about. And obviously it provides a blueprint for the Air Force to maximize and expand its technological advantage. That strategy called for some sweeping changes to the way that the Air Force develops new technologies. So could you share with us a little bit more what you see as the main technological opportunities and hurdles that the Air Force needs to overcome to accomplish its ultimate outcomes and desired effects?
I'd love to talk a little bit about that. So, you're right in your assessment of the strategy. In the strategy, we looked at the what, we also looked at the how. So as well as saying, look, these are the capabilities that we need in order to win, we also said how we're going to go about readying our S&T enterprise to deliver on those capabilities. And, I have to say that, now that I'm on the inside and I've had the opportunity to receive some briefings on the execution of the strategy, I'm truly heartened to see how much change already has taken place and how mindful and deliberate that change has been on the how part. On the kind of technology side, the strategy made the distinction between two kinds of technologies. We talked about enduring lines of research, things that the Air Force, would need to be in for the long haul in order to reap the fruit of that investment. And then we talked about the transformational component. So by definition, enduring areas of research like quantum, like lasers, these things take years to mature. So you will have, and Tim Bunning, the CTO of the FRL, calls them cylinders of excellence. I really like that metaphor. So you have the cylinders of excellence, but what we also need to be able to do, as I said a little earlier, is like take those things and produce a capability that actually is fieldable. So how do we get that? How do we get the crosstalk? So the transformational component of the strategy was meant to create an opportunity, a vehicle, and a resource pool to address exactly that question. The goal in the strategy and what has been implemented is 20% of our S&T budget is dedicated to these transformational efforts. And what we are hoping to achieve is change in 5 different domains. We call them global persistence awareness, resilient information sharing, rapid effective decision making, complexity, unpredictability, and mass, and number 5 is speed and reach of disruption and lethality. So we hope that when all that comes together, really we have a Space Force and an Air Force, and I said Space Force quite deliberately there because we're now also two services. When the strategy was written, we only had one. Both Space Force and Air Force that dominate the time, space, and complexity across all operating domains. That's our ambition, that's our aspiration, that's what we think we need to do in order to win. So, how do we, again, arrange ourselves, how do we execute in order to get there? Is certainly, it's something that I think about all the time. It's something that my colleagues within the S&T enterprise, General Pringle, General Bunch, are thinking about all the time. It's also what the chief thinks all the time. So the chief, as you know, he talks about the need to accelerate change or lose. So, when we look at that in our context, in the S&T context, how do we follow that commander's intent? Well, we do that when we start building out these transformational cross-cutting capabilities, and we do so in ways that we have not attempted to do in the past. So, I will tell you, having seen how much work has already been done, how many interesting projects have been put together, so many of these vanguard programs we've been able to put together, I think we are making some really important and with deep footsteps. These are footsteps that will take a long time to eliminate the memory of. Hopefully that gives you a sense for how overall we're approaching this. And I understand that these areas are fairly, these capabilities are very strategic, but unless we have that as a goal, you know what they say, if you don't have a destination, all roads will take you there. And, we can't afford that. We have, our Air Force and our Space Force, we have a massive, big mission. We have to organize, train, and equip for today and for tomorrow with a massive set of missions. We have to be really smart about how we get after all of these needs that we have, and do so in a way that is effective.
No, I think that's very, very helpful. And those 5 elements that you mentioned, they're cast again in the terms of a desired outcome or effect. And so my compliments to you on that. Now, jumping from strategy down to a specific, the shortfall in domestic foundries for microelectronics has really become an issue of concern within the Air Force, given the critical importance of these components to military systems. How important is it to the Air Force that it can secure a supply chain for microelectronics, and what can the Air Force do to grow the related domestic industrial base?
So, microelectronics is the fabric on which we depend to execute our mission more than anything else. I think, I know there are some aspects of kinetics that matter too, but microelectronics really is present in just about everything that we do. So, when we look at the need from even a broader department perspective, what do we need? First of all, we need advanced components. So we need availability of those things. We need them to be performant. In other words, we don't want antique parts. We need them to be trustworthy, and we need them to be affordable. So, it's not possible for us, to have this exquisite part that we're going to put inside of an airframe that we have to spend the equivalent of buying an aircraft carrier for, right? So these are the things that we look at from a broader departmental perspective, and that certainly includes the Air Force. Now, it's fair to say in our kind of fight to secure these components for the Air Force, and we have terrific partnerships within the department. So the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering and the counterparts in acquisition and sustainment had made microelectronics their #1 priority. And in the past 3 or 4 years, they've put together a significant roadmap that goes to not only produce parts that we need for our for our missions now and in the future, but also to secure and grow, revitalize, if you like, the domestic fabrication capability. So we look to the OSD and our partners in ANS and R&E as as primary drivers for that. However, that's not to say that we're sitting on the sidelines. The AFRL has a very robust program in microelectronics. In fact, only last week, I participated in a 2-day workshop working on microelectronics workforce issues, because when you seek to secure the supply of these devices, even if you have the money to build the fabs, somebody's got to operate them. Somebody needs to build the innovation. Somebody needs to scale it. Somebody needs to calibrate the factory so that you have the yield that you need in order to succeed financially. All that requires talent. So when we look at it, we'll look at this from all the angles, right? So it's not just one piece, somebody developing a new device somewhere, or a new part that we need for a mission. We look at the problem more broadly. Not to say that the Air Force does not have specific requirements. We could speak, for example, about rad hard components. There's been something that is particularly relevant for our mission, especially our Space Force, and these tend to be very specific parts. But even it's interesting. Even in those cases, many times we find that we have to use commercial parts and we test them to our specifications in order to deploy them in those missions. And we really, this is like where really the rubber meets the road. We can't execute the missions that we need to execute without high-end microelectronics in those systems. And it's we really don't have an option. We can't operate with antique parts and expect the levels of performance or support the missions that we know we need to fight with, without making those components available. And then a whole bunch of other things, are important. Certification. I can give you a part, but if it takes you 10 years to certify it, by the time. So I was saying earlier that innovation is a business of the entire enterprise. That's what I mean. I mean, if we have a robust industrial base here at home, if we make these devices that we need, but then it takes us 10 years to deploy them, we don't win. We just lose more slowly. So,
right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. No, thank you for that. Clearly, that's an area of ever increasing importance. The Air Force is also seeking to leverage human machine teams to maintain an advantage over peer competitors. In your time so far there in the Air Force, how prepared do you believe the Air Force is to begin fielding the technologies to enable human machine teams, and what does the Air Force need to do to demonstrate that it's really capable of doing so?
Yeah, it's interesting, Dave. I mean, we, in many ways, we've been operating human machine teams for many years. It's just that these machines are getting more and more capable. So, there comes a point where, we have to make that determination be much more deliberate than it otherwise is. So the good news is we're not doing this on our own. So, as you all know, and again, you had Tim Grayson on your stage earlier today. DARPA had, for example, the ACE program, and there was a well-publicized Alpha Dogfight event last summer. And what was exciting, of course, there was AI, driving missions and so on. But actually, what DARPA was trying to figure out was how do we have humans and machines operate better together to get better outcomes. So I think some of that experimentation is taking place already. But I will tell you, my own assessment is the way to deploying more and more of these teams is more and more experimentation. And it's kind of interesting, when we think about how we form human teams, how do we do that? Well, we do that. I have a team here. I'm very fortunate to have a team. We form teams by building trust in each other. And we build trust in each other how? Not by looking at each other, but by working together, by watching each other in action. And also by having specialties. So there are people here that know a lot more about the Air Force than I will ever know. There are people here that know a lot more about lasers than I will ever know. We have a team that is heterogeneous with different competencies that builds trust over time. I don't think that human machine teams are going to be any different. I think we will build trust in these machines as we see them in execution, and we will also see machines that are not generic. They're not going to be humans. We are like we're so multifaceted as human beings. I think our machines will tend to be specialists in different domains, and maybe they will get better than us in those domains. But at the end of the day, I think the team that deploys more, that experiments more, that learns more about each other is the team that's going to succeed. I think somebody said, I don't know, I think maybe this attribution is incorrect, and if it is, I apologize. I think Elon Musk said that, in order to succeed in this business of firing rockets and having them come back again, on the ground without breaking up, he said you need multiple rendezvous with reality. And I think that is very much also what we need in order to make more progress, not in the creation, but the fielding of these teams. Because, we have a ton of technology. What we need to work more of is how do we trust each other? How do we, test a little, field a little, so that we feel comfortable, to go to war, to go persecute missions with these machines, with these hybrid teams. So for me, it's all about experimentation. And if I can say one more thing, I had the opportunity a few weeks ago to participate in a National Academy of Sciences study that looked at test ranges. So I was at DARPA. They invited me to speak to this, and I'm thinking, I don't know anything about test ranges. What am I going to say? Anyway, so we have this conversation, and I have this kind of cast iron belief that the big systems, transformational systems, the way you get them out there is, again, by building a little, testing a little, fielding a little. So that's what I said to them. I said, how would we do that? In software, we know how to do that. How do we do that, with airplanes, with other equipment? Do we have it, will you give me a test range so I can do agile development? And they said, well, we don't have such test ranges. So think about that, right? If our goal is to get ahead by fielding rapidly, in order to do that, we need to change even the way that our testing infrastructure works. So we need to get this message of agility and leanness and have it permeate the entire kind of, innovation pipeline. So it's not good enough if, our brilliant scientists at AFRL innovate. The brilliant people that build and operate test ranges, they gotta innovate too, in order for the goodness to flow all the way to the warfighter.
No, it's great to hear you say that. And as you're talking, I'm thinking a bit that it's not, we tend to segregate activity. We tend to segregate airplanes, in the Air Force by type to achieve efficiencies. But when you start looking at something like loyal wingman, and we start employing uninhabited aerial vehicles with manned aircraft, maybe we need to break that mold too. And instead of assigning them to separate units, we integrate them together in the units that they will be operating with. So organizational change needs to be part of what you described as well.
I wish I could disagree with you, because I think it's really hard to do, but I can't disagree with you. I think we, in order to win, we need to fight jointly. So jointness, whatever that implies for the different kind of components here is what it's all about. And that's why, I'm so excited about the technologies that, the STO at DARPA around Mosaic, for example, and Stitches are putting forward, because, that begins to give you, the framework that you can use in order to construct this kind of just-in-time, packages, at least, for delivering capability. But it's something that really needs to transcend the entire enterprise.
Right.
So jointness is not something that can just happen, when you go fight a mission. Jointness has to be how we operate, how we think of ourselves. And, and it's not just a business, of the Joint Chiefs to think about jointness. I mean, everybody, while we specialize within the services, we also need to be thinking jointly all the time, because at the end of the day, that's how we're going to go fight. I mean, it's not going to be, just the Air Force or just the Space Force or any other of the services that goes to war alone.
Well, the Army kind of thinks they can do that, but that's another. We'll save that for another time.
I'm not qualified to make any statements about the Army.
Well, I am, so that's why I made that one.
Okay.
The Air Force has described the advanced battle management system as a military Internet of Things to connect sensors and shooters, and I'd also add effectors. Is this a fair description of the program, given the differences between building commercial and military technology? And if so, what are the technological hurdles that the Air Force needs to overcome to achieve this kind of vision?
So it's, I had the opportunity to receive a briefing on ABMS a couple of weeks ago, and honestly, this was my first one, so I'm hardly an expert. I need to preface by saying that. And then, perhaps my first comment, it will be about the description of it as a program. I don't think that, within the Air Force, the ABMS kind of meets the standard requirement of what a program is. I think, in truth, is a very advanced concept, and there is, building and experimentation going on, as you know, but it's not a program. Now, what it actually tries to do does approximate what a military Internet of Things would look like. And that's where I think many of the challenges come through. So if you think about, what does the Internet mean? Well, Internet, first of all, is available all the time. It's available all the time, and you don't even know it. It's part of the fabric. It's so ubiquitous. It has disappeared. You don't see it. So that means that ABMS will need to provide 24/7 connectivity across the globe, across classification domains, across service jurisdictions, and Lord help us, across allies. And it will need to connect sensors and actuators in this cloud that's going to go off to fight a mission. So, I don't know of any program that would stress the technologies that we have in all these areas more than ABMS will do. I don't know of a program that's more ambitious, but I will tell you one thing. I don't know if ABMS will succeed. I hope it does. But even if it doesn't, I'm a big believer in having grand visions, but then delivering capability incrementally. What I really want to know is, what's the first thing that we're going to do out of ABMS? Because unless you have this multiple rendezvous with reality, you never make progress. In the commercial world, we think about MVPs, minimum viable products, and they're really the way that capability is delivered. And it's a wonderful thing, because once you have the capability in the hands of the end user, first of all, you create some value, one hopes, but then you learn a ton about what you need to do next. So instead of, having this theory about what the plurality of the solution will be, by putting it in the hands of the operator in small increments, you begin to see what works, what doesn't work. The operator understands what the capability is. They can figure out ways of using the capability that, I, as a scientist and engineer, would never think about, because I'm not trained in that. But if the technology stays in my lab, in my office, it never meets the light of day. It robs everybody of the opportunity to see what the true potential is. So my hope, my desire for the ABMS system is not necessarily for them to think less ambitiously. They should think very ambitiously, but they should deliver incrementally, right? So
Very good.
I think that's what we need. We need a frequent access to reality, deliver, because then that helps everybody. It helps the team that's building to feel that they are actually helping the mission that they signed up to support. It helps the operator. It helps management understand what are the degrees of freedom that they have, and then it helps investment to flow in the right places. So I'm a big proponent of incremental delivery, and I think ABMS it's a perfect vehicle for trying that approach.
Very good. Thank you very much. That makes a lot of sense. And the other part, if I can interject, the fundamental element upon which ABMS and all the other service equivalents rely on is the ubiquitous and seamless sharing of information. You alluded to that when you described the internet.
Yeah.
It might not be very sexy, but until we can get to the point where that military cloud or that the Internet of Things can operate, military Internet of Things can operate on, is there 24/7, 365, and with a reliability of nearly 100%. Only then will we be able to realize those apps that people are innovating to put on that internet right now. Okay,
amen to that.
Yeah, and it can't just be based on a radio frequency. We got to get into laser, optical. Yeah, we could spend an hour on this. So let me
the next hour.
Next question. You've previously discussed how many commercial enterprises have a hard time finding work with the Pentagon, how hard they find it working with the Pentagon. When you consider the Air Force's science and technology goals, where do you think the Air Force needs to make the greatest efforts to expand its collaborations with industry?
So, I'll tell you, I'll tell you a couple of stories to indicate, the kind of the depth of the problem as I see it. So, I just before going to DARPA, I was the CEO of an AI startup, a spin-out out of Stanford. The work that we did was, I thought, pretty phenomenal. We would take an open source satellite image, would use some data from the ground, and we'll be able to tell if a village in Africa would have $5 a day to spend disposable income or one. We would take a patch of land in Africa, 10 by 10 meters, and we could tell you how much corn we would kill. Amazing stuff. I had been at that point, I had served on the Defense Science Board for 5 years. I had participated in the creation of the S&T strategy for the Air Force. I knew the department. I did not know where to go, who to talk to about my little company and what we were doing. So, example one. Example two, we have this wonderful DIU function now out in the valley. And they're small, but they're mighty. When they started, though, it was a different story. So I'm having actually dinner tonight with the CEO of a company called Rhombus that is deploying a system here inside of the Air Force called Guardian, an AI system. And they did that through DIU. But how that story starts is interesting. So the CEO, Anshu Roy, a brilliant nuclear physicist, just like my MILDEP here on the CERNA, he had heard about DIU and he'd heard about the desire of the department to work with small companies. He had this thing in his hand that he thought would be so valuable. He heard about DIU, gets in his car, drives down to Moffett Field. And Moffett Field is a big place. There are lots of squat buildings. So he's driving around, he didn't know where to go. He asks somebody, says, "Where's DIU, the guard?" The guard says, "I don't know." this guy goes by and says, like, looking for DIU? I'm DIU. It was the first director of DIU, and I forget the name of the gentleman now. But I'm sure Roy was driving this car. He was wearing, a hoodie, as people do in the Valley. So the DIU director turns to him and says, "Who are you? Are you the furniture delivery guy?" So they got over that. They had a great discussion, and now we have. Thank you, George Duchak. Now we have Guardian, deployed here in the Air Force, and we're talking about even expanding it. So it's a great success story, but it wasn't going to happen if Anshu Roy did not make it, if he wasn't so bloody minded about it. So I think there is a ton, there's a mountain, an ocean, I don't know what superlative to use, of technology expertise, outside the department, and the desire, coupled with the desire to help us with our missions. We need to make that footprint much wider than it is. And the Air Force has done, I think, a tremendous job in the last 3 or 4 years, certainly while Will Roper was here. One of the things that they did, they created the AFWorks program that is really expanding the aperture. Right. I think we're learning a ton. We're bringing a ton of innovation back into the department. And the good thing about it is they did something. They had an MVP, right? They started. As we're learning more about what works and what doesn't work, that program will get better and better and better and more focused and more productive, but they started somewhere. So I am really excited about the opportunity that presents. I think that we need to go much, much further than even that program allows us to do right now. That's really the only way to succeed. I'll tell you, what I really want, what I wanted while I was at DARPA, and I didn't quite get to it, was to have a point of presence in the Valley. You know how there are Apple stores, people walk in and they see these wonderful gadgets? I wanted to have one of these for the department, right there in downtown Palo Alto. So people that, where there's foot traffic, people will go by, they could come in and see the great things that they could see an ABMS, for example, concept, and they could think, geez, you know what? I have this bit that might fit in there. How else would they know? And then behind the counter, there would be people that they would go talk to that would be knowledgeable about these programs. The connection would be made right there and then. There wouldn't be any need to be bloody-minded about finding your entrance to the DIU before you could speak to somebody. So, I think we're making a lot of progress, and that's demonstrating how much more we can do and how much better it could be if we were successful.
Those are great analogies and great recommendations. Now, on a related issue, some recent cyber attacks on U.S. infrastructure and government have demonstrated the vulnerability of the networks that we rely on. So what steps do you think the Air Force should take to protect its own operations? And are there some lessons out there that you think the Air Force can apply from the computer science industry?
I think that's one of the so-called wicked problems, right? It truly is a wicked problem. And, the Air Force is a user of that infrastructure. The Air Force is not the producer of that infrastructure. And I strongly believe every time we try to produce infrastructure, we get it wrong, because that's not our line of business. Our line of business is different. So I think, and you wouldn't be surprised to hear me say that, I think that a lot of the infrastructure that we use will eventually need to come out from the commercial sector, from the world out there that has built it, has deployed it, has scaled it, has operated it, and has learned, what works, what doesn't work. The community that maintains it. One of the worst aspects of our inability to field new technology in the department is the fact that we put it out there and it takes us years to change it. And there are no systems that I know of that have no vulnerabilities. So the longer you have it out there, the longer the adversary has to find ways to find all those vulnerabilities that we didn't find when we built it in the first place. The only way to avoid that is to have it change all the time. And how are you going to change it all the time if it costs too much and you don't have the expertise? Well, if it's not a core competency, let somebody else do it. And I will not say for a second that the industrial world, the private world has solved this problem. But by golly, we haven't solved it either. And if our approach is to build it custom for us and believe that somehow we're going to avoid all the pitfalls that a private sector solution has, then I think we're kidding ourselves. The reason why the systems are vulnerable, for the most part, is because they are wicked hard to put together. So people just make mistakes, and then people find those vulnerabilities and exploit them. One of the recommendations that we had in 2018 when we looked at microelectronics was to create, to plus up the JFAC. And, the idea being finding vulnerabilities, latent vulnerabilities before our adversaries did that. And the question we were asking ourselves was, well, so suppose that we recommend, that there would be, 500 people inside of the JFAC to do this. Where would we find these people? Which school would they come from? Which companies would we hire them from? I worked at Intel, and I knew how good our people were, and I knew how hard we tried to make devices that were secure. And here we were, 2 decades later, finding vulnerabilities like Meltdown and Scepter and what have you. That's not because Intel engineers didn't care or they weren't good. They were the best in the business. It's just wicked hard. So I think this is a it's an arms race. People have said that it's an arms race. I think it's a war that we're better off fighting with our partners from the private sector. We certainly need to take into account our mission and how we best prosecute it. But I think the core technologies for what we need are going to come from the outside, and so will, by the way, our best known methods for using that infrastructure, because it's not just about the technology. You don't just throw things over the wall. You also need to have the know-how and the and the culture for using it, so that you know what to do when it doesn't work. You know who to go to. You have this whole kind of enterprise around it. And we were talking about innovation being everybody's business. Cybersecurity is like that as well. It's everybody's business.
Right. Well, thank you very much. We've come to the end of this segment of our discussion. And thanks again, Dr. Coleman, for your insightful comments and for sharing your perspectives on Air Force science priorities. What we're going to do right now is open this session to questions from the audience who've been listening into the conversation. I believe this crowd knows how to do that, but use the raise hand function. And when I call on you, please unmute your mic and state your name and affiliation. We're going to get started with a question from the question and answer function from Tony Capaccio, Bloomberg. And Tony asks, before coming to the Air Force, you chaired a major Defense Science Board review of defense microelectronic issues that's not yet released. Could you outline some of the major findings, and how do the report's findings fit into the overall Biden administration semiconductor policy review?
Thank you for that question. And I wish I could answer it. Unfortunately, I can't, because I don't know what's in the report. I stopped being a member of the Defense Science Board when I joined DARPA. So while I was there at the inception of that study, I was not there at this conclusion. And as you know, the various scientific advisory boards, the DSP included, are on furlough right now while we review their operations. So that report, I believe, exists, but it is not made public. I will comment, however, on the 2018 report that the Defense Science Board did. And if you haven't seen that, I would I would highly recommend you review that. That was published in 2018. And I had the privilege of chairing that study. The recommendations that were made were, first of all, make sure that the department has access to rad-hard components that we need for our missions. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. We talked about the need to find vulnerabilities before others do. So, the desire to add more capacity capability to the JFAC. We talked a little bit about being smart about how you bring new components inside of our defense system. So we put forward heterogeneous integration as a key technology approach that allows you to allows the DoD to kind of customize its solutions to bring in the best of breed from a variety of technologies in one infrastructure. We also talked about the need to invest in beyond CMOS solutions, because we believe strongly, and I still believe that that's what gives us the leap ahead. But with that comes also the responsibility of accelerating the transition of those innovations from the lab to the fab. So there was a recommendation, which I'm really pleased actually to see being taken up in the CHIPS legislation, around creating a microelectronics commons, proving grounds, if you like, for innovations that come out of research that the NSF and DARPA puts forward. And the final recommendation, which is a really critical one, was all about workforce development, because we wanted, like I said, 500 people to put inside of the JFAC. Well, where exactly would they come from? We talked about heterogeneous integration as a key competency for the department. Where are these people going to come from? So workforce development was something that we felt very strongly about. So I don't know what the latest DSP study will recommend, but I'd be shocked if it was a million miles away from what I just described.
Thanks for that, Dr. Coleman. Here's one from James Pate. It seems like the Department of Defense has ceded significant scientific expertise and innovation capacity to industry over the last 20 to 30 years. If the government is not going to build it, how do we better port innovation ideas or concepts from within locations like Air Force research labs to the production line?
So that's a great observation. And I will start by saying that actually what happened is not that we started investing less as a government. It's just that the commercial sector, the private sector, has invested a hell of a lot more. So the proportions have changed. So that also means that for us, of course, there's now a much greater opportunity to leverage the investment that others are making to bring it here to the fight. So that's why I think it's really important for us to have great connectivity with the private sector. Now, the second part of the question, and I think that is a great observation again. I think there are two ways to look at it. One is, how do you go about accelerating the transit of learnings and technology from the AFRL right inside its core customer, the Air Force, and we do this, I think, partly through these transformational capabilities that we talked about earlier, as well as the well-established methods of experimentation. But again, innovation needs to be executable across the organization, and that means innovating in transition as well. So there may be some technology that somebody at the AFRL or even a DARPA performer has come up with that we see has a ton of potential. If we could, if we bring it about, it could really be game-changing in a mission that we want to fight. But it's not ready. And by the way, we don't have the money or the people inside of the government to mature that. What do? Well, what we can do is take a leaf out of the AFRICS book or the Embedded Entrepreneurship Initiative at DARPA and help those innovators create a new company, a new little company that can go off, build the technology, field it, mature it, maintain it, and then we'll bring it back into our mission. And it's not necessarily the case that all these ideas will come from the outside. Many of them will come from the inside. So one of the things that would be, I think, terrific to do, and I don't think there are any significant barriers to this other than kind of desire to do it. Spinning out technologies from the AFRL and actually taking some of our personnel and putting them in a small business on the outside, so they learn those tricks, the tricks of entrepreneurship and how technology really can be delivered in products, and then maybe come back into the lab and bring that set of insights and those capabilities right back into our kind of into the core muscle for innovation that we have at the Air Force. So I think creating a spin-out program like that would be a terrific thing to do, and we know how to do it. One of the things that both DARPA and AFWERX have done really well is we've built a good set of relationships with venture capitalists, for example. One of the things that we want to do here at the Air Force is to even expand that to create a VC forum. So we know who to go to get this support for these companies. We know where to send them. So I think there's a terrific opportunity out there to leverage talent, slightly outside the perimeter, and capital certainly outside the perimeter to help us with our own objectives.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Coleman. How about we turn now to John Turpak?
Yes, thank you very much. Doctor, can you tell us what's urgent? Your predecessor told us there were some urgent investments that needed to be made, for example, in the hypersonic wind tunnel area, because hypersonics are advancing rapidly. We don't have a lot of infrastructure in that department. When we get a new Secretary of the Air Force, what's going to be your top 1, 2, or 3 things that we need to spend some money on urgently?
Yeah, so hypersonics definitely is on that list. I would say, we were talking about ABMS a moment ago. Jointness is really high up on that list. Microelectronics is high up on that list because it underlines, everything we do. And then, there are specific kind of capabilities that, we hold close that are also high priorities. But if you take something like hypersonics, the need is clear, and investments have been made, and we've had terrific successes. I mean, I tell you, the best day of my short tenure at DARPA was December 8th. We had the first ever flight of the TBG, the Tactical Boost Glide Vehicle. It was an amazing thing. But we have a ton of work to do, and we have a ton of work to do for which our infrastructure here on the ground is wanting. So we definitely need to make it a priority to create the infrastructure that allows us to make accelerated progress in hypersonics, both in offense and defense. Let's leave it at that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we've come to the end of this Aerospace Nation event, and I'd like to offer a big thanks again to Dr. Coleman, and also a big welcome to the Air Force.
Stay tuned.
To you and to our audience, from all of us here at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Power Studies, have a great aerospace power kind of day.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, sir. Thank you.